Oh, fucking hell. Okay, I'm ready. Hi guys, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be doing a little video talking about my OCD story in a little bit more detail. This is going to be a very difficult video to film. I'm going to be talking about quite a few traumatic things, but I think that this video is so relevant for a few reasons. First of all, OCD has affected me so much throughout my life. I've been suffering with OCD for nearly a decade, and it has been a very difficult experience, but something that I think has enabled me to be able to help other people who are suffering with OCD, and that is what I kind of feel like my purpose is. OCD is also a very commonly misunderstood disorder. It's often depicted as cleanliness and organisation, when in reality it is very, very different to that. OCD is a very disabling disorder. There was a survey done of the top 10 most disabling disorders, and that included physical disorders as well, and OCD came in the top 10, so it was the only mental disorder to come in the top 10, and that just highlights how disabling of a disorder it is, and people that are suffering really, really need help and really deserve access to treatment. Which brings me on to another point, which is that OCD affects 1.2% of the population, and yet it receives only 0.3% of the mental health budget. I mean, that is a really shocking statistic. OCD receives such a little slither of the mental health budget, and it is such a disabling disorder that a lot of people are suffering with. So the purpose of this video is really to raise awareness about OCD and to help those who are suffering. I really want people to understand OCD better, understand what people go through, and I really want to show those that are suffering that OCD can be treated and you can live a really successful life. I am living so much better now than I was before, and I think it's really important for me to demonstrate that OCD can be treated and that things can get better. So I just want to apologise for any fireworks that are going on. It is bonfire night soon and there is a lot of fireworks going on this evening, so I apologise for that. But I'm going to get into my story about OCD, and I'm going to talk first of all about how my OCD developed. So I never really had any problems with mental health until I was about 11 years old. That's when I started to suffer with generalised anxiety disorder and social anxiety disorder. This very heavily influenced my eating disorder, which I was diagnosed with at 13. I was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa, and while I was suffering with anorexia, that's when I developed my OCD. So my OCD originally began as compulsive exercising in response to intrusive thoughts about my appearance. I would have these thoughts that if I didn't exercise in specific patterns and numbers, that I wouldn't achieve the desired effect that I really wanted, and that I would be fat or ugly. And in response, I would have to exercise in these patterns and numbers until things felt just right. But these compulsions very, very quickly morphed into other physical compulsions directly related to my generalised anxiety. So I went from just compulsively exercising in numbers to having to repeat many, many behaviours in specific patterns. Any movement in general was accompanied by a compulsion, and this became very, very tiring very quickly. I suffered with this for quite a few months. I would have routines I'd have to perform every morning when I woke up, and every night. I would have to repeat myself doing so many different actions throughout the day. But eventually I kind of wiggled my way out of this with a really unhelpful behaviour. I actually used compulsions to get me out of doing compulsions, and I'm not going to go into detail about how that happened because it's very unhelpful. It was only short-lived. My OCD was kept at bay for a little while, but then it did come back in full swing, and this time it was in a very different way. In response to my anxiety, I would get a lot of digestive problems, and I constantly had this feeling of butterflies in my stomach, which I'm sure a lot of you can relate to. And my OCD latched onto this feeling. I would get stuck in places trying to rid myself of this feeling, try and relieve myself of these butterflies before I could move on with the rest of my day. I'd have to sit there, I'd have to wait until I felt better, I'd have to reassure myself that I was feeling better, do everything possible to try and get rid of this feeling in my stomach before I could move on with any other part of my day. And obviously it didn't really work. The point of OCD is it's a vicious cycle, so I would have this feeling of butterflies in my stomach, I would try and get rid of it, but then very quickly the feeling would come back and I would have to do it all over again. And my OCD stayed in that way for a few years. I was constantly trying to rid myself of this feeling. But my OCD got a lot worse when I was 17, when it started to morph into intrusive thoughts related to morality and being a good person, and mental compulsions in response, mostly reassurance. I was absolutely terrified of being a bad person and doing anything immoral, and I would have to constantly reassure myself that I didn't want to do immoral actions. I suffered in silence with this for a couple of years until after my 18th birthday, when things really took a turn for the worse. My OCD changed once again, and this time my physical compulsions came back in full swing. In response to my generalized anxiety, which for me is this constant feeling of fear and my fear of anything going wrong at any given moment, I would have to perform many physical compulsions and mental compulsions. Sometimes I would have specific intrusive images or thoughts about something going horribly wrong, and other times it was just this general feeling of dread that I had, and in response I would have to do almost every single action in specific patterns. This made moving full stop a very difficult thing to do, to the point where I would end up just laying in bed for days on end, not eating, drinking, or even sleeping. Obviously, my family noticed what was going on. I was really unwell, and eventually I was admitted to hospital. I was under this psychiatrist, who I'm still under now, and he prescribed me medication to lessen my symptoms. Unfortunately, there were no therapists available at the time, and I wasn't able to engage in any direct therapy treatment for my OCD. But while I was in hospital, I was treated with medication, and I also had talking therapies for my anxiety, my depression, and self-harm. Now, when I talk about being in hospital, I say that I wasn't moving, and I genuinely mean it. I would literally stay in one place for hours. It got to the point where I had to be taken to A&E, and I was put on a drip because of how dehydrated I was. I hadn't eaten or drunk any water in ages, and I was really physically unwell. Luckily, the medication did really help me, and it managed to lessen my symptoms, and after 3 months of being in hospital, I was able to leave when I could pretty much function at a relatively normal level again. I was back to eating and drinking and sleeping much more regularly. I tried my best at this point to live as best as I could, but unfortunately I was still really suffering from not only my OCD, but my depression, my anxiety, and self-harm. This was a very rocky period of time. I would have a lot of ups and downs, but I did manage to get through it, and eventually I felt well enough to apply for university. But once it came around to actually going to university, I started to experience a lot of my OCD symptoms again, but I kept it under wraps because I didn't want to scare anyone. I didn't want anyone to think I was getting worse. So I actually went to university despite struggling with my OCD a lot. But while I was at university and I was living on my own, my OCD spiraled out of control again, and I was really struggling to survive each day. I was in a really bad state, being stuck in different places for hours, doing compulsions, and it was just really exhausting. Eventually I got in contact with my psychiatrist, and I did have to wait a little while, but I did manage to get myself back into hospital, and this time I was able to engage in therapy. So when I was 20, I was admitted to hospital for the second time, and this time I engaged in exposure response prevention therapy. Sorry, it's a bit of a mouthful. I'm just going to call it ERP. So ERP is a type of therapy where you are exposed to your fears so that intrusive thoughts will arise, and then what you do is you change your response to your intrusive thoughts. So instead of engaging in compulsive behaviors, you actually force yourself to not engage in behaviors and just sit with the anxiety and learn to tolerate it. And the more times you repeat that, the more your brain learns that these intrusive thoughts aren't actually dangerous and that the anxiety will come down on its own. Obviously, it's a very difficult thing to engage in, but I promise you it works. I am proof of that. I actually had to do I guess you could say even more challenging type of ERP. I did flooding, which is where rather than doing things in a hierarchy and building yourself up, you actually do a lot of things in one go. That's what I had to do because my compulsions were mental and physical, and there was a lot going on at once. But eventually my brain started to learn that these intrusive thoughts that I was so terrified of were not actually scary, and that if I allowed the anxiety to be there, it would go away on its own. And that is what I learned from ERP therapy, and it literally changed my life. It changed my whole perspective. It's basically rewired my brain to learn that these things are not as scary as they seem, and it has made me so much better off. But yeah, eventually I left hospital, and that brings me to where I am now in my life. So what I did when I left hospital was I actually completed a personal training course, because throughout my life and throughout my struggles with mental health, I have always found fitness to be a really valuable tool in helping me, and it's weightlifting in particular that I fell in love with. And I really want to help other people find their passion for fitness and have it help them with their mental and physical health. And I'm now working as a personal trainer, and I am also using my social media to help people with their mental health, their physical health, their training, all of the above. And honestly, it's the most fulfilling thing. I just absolutely love helping people, seeing people grow better, grow stronger. And there's no better feeling than helping people get over some really difficult challenges. But in terms of my OCD and where I am now, I mean, I'm still challenging my OCD on a daily basis. That won't really change, but I am so much better off than I was before. I am now so much more equipped to say no to my compulsions. My anxiety in response to intrusive thoughts is much less as well. I just want to end this video by saying I hope this was useful to you, or it taught you something about OCD that you didn't know before. If you are suffering with OCD, I really hope that I've shown you that a better life is possible. And I also hope that by raising awareness, I can also create better access to treatment so that everyone can get the treatment that they deserve and that no one has to suffer with this debilitating disorder. So again, I hope this has been useful in some way. I hope that this video can do some good, and it was really amazing to talk to you guys. This was a very difficult video to film, but like I said, I hope it can do some good in the world. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in another video. Bye!